The bone-cold winter wind rattled through the cracks in the attic walls as Eleanor Sutton pressed her trembling hand against her hollow stomach, knowing that this might be her last night alive. She had been locked in this freezing space for 3 weeks now, receiving nothing but occasional sips of water and cruel words from the people who were supposed to be her family. Her husband Thomas had been dead for 2 months, thrown from his horse during a cattle drive, and his parents had wasted no time showing their true colors once their son was buried in the frozen ground. They blamed her for his death, claimed she had distracted him with her needs, her presence, her very existence. The Sutton family ranch outside Fort Bridger, Wyoming had become her prison, and she could feel her body giving up, her legs too weak to support her weight, her mind growing foggy from starvation. Eleanor had married Thomas Sutton in the spring of 1881 when she was 19 years old and he was 23, both of them full of hope for their future together. They had met at a church social in town, and he had courted her properly, bringing her wildflowers and promising her a good life on his family's sprawling ranch. What she had not known was that his parents, Margaret and Robert Sutton, had never approved of the match. They thought her beneath their son, the daughter of a seamstress with no land and no prospects. Thomas had defied them to marry her, and for a brief summer and autumn Eleanor had known happiness. Her husband had been kind to her, protective, and spoke of the day when they would have their own home away from his parents' constant criticism. But then came that terrible October morning when the ranch hands brought Thomas back draped over his saddle, his neck broken, his eyes staring at nothing. Eleanor had screamed until her voice gave out, had collapsed beside his body in the mud. Margaret had slapped her face and told her to stop making a spectacle of herself. Robert had looked at her with cold eyes and said that she had brought nothing but misfortune to their family. After the funeral, things had deteriorated rapidly. They moved her belongings to the attic, a drafty space meant for storage, not living. They stopped inviting her to meals, claiming she did not deserve to eat their food when she contributed nothing. When Eleanor had tried to leave, to walk the 8 miles to Fort Bridger despite the snow, Robert had locked her in, boarding up the attic door from the outside. The first week had been agony, her stomach cramping with hunger, as she heard them eating downstairs, the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread drifting up through the floorboards to torture her. The second week, the hunger had dulled into a constant ache, and she had begun to feel dizzy whenever she tried to stand. Margaret had come up twice to bring her water, pouring it into a tin cup and watching with satisfaction as Eleanor's shaking hands could barely hold it. By the third week, Eleanor could no longer walk. Her legs would not support her weight, and she spent her days huddled under a thin blanket, drifting in and out of consciousness, wondering if anyone in town even remembered she existed. It was on a Tuesday morning, the 21st day of her captivity, that she heard shouting downstairs. Through the haze of semi-consciousness, she could not make out the words, but there were raised voices, including one she did not recognize. Heavy boots climbed the stairs, and then she heard someone working at the boards across the attic door. Eleanor tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. The door burst open, and a tall figure filled the doorway, silhouetted against the light from below. "Good God," the man breathed, and then he was moving toward her, dropping to his knees beside the pile of blankets where she lay. "Miss, can you hear me?" Eleanor managed to open her eyes fully and found herself looking into the face of a stranger. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and concerned gray eyes. He wore a heavy coat dusted with snow and a battered hat that he pulled off as he leaned closer. His face was weathered from outdoor work, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' growth of beard. There was something gentle in his expression despite his rough appearance, something that made tears spring to Eleanor's eyes. "Please," she managed to whisper, "help me." "I'm going to help you," he said firmly. "My name is Harrison Porter. I'm getting you out of here right now." Harrison had his own horse tied outside, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, but he did not waste time trying to get Eleanor down the stairs. Instead, he wrapped her carefully in the blanket and lifted her as though she weighed nothing, which she nearly did after 3 weeks without food. She caught a glimpse of Margaret and Robert standing in their parlor looking furious as Harrison carried her through the house. Robert moved as if to block the door, but Harrison fixed him with such a cold stare that the older man stepped aside. "If she dies, I will be back," Harrison said quietly, "and I will bring the law with me." He carried Eleanor out into the bitter cold where the snow was falling in thick flakes. He had brought a wagon rather than riding, as though he had known he would need it, and he settled her gently in the back among several blankets he had piled there. He climbed up to the driver's seat and urged the horses into motion, steering them down the long drive away from the Sutton ranch. Eleanor faded in and out of awareness during the journey, catching glimpses of pine trees heavy with snow, of Harrison's broad back as he drove the team, of the gray sky overhead. When they reached Fort Bridger, Harrison did not take her to the doctor's office or to the boarding house. Instead, he drove to a small cabin on the eastern edge of town, a neat structure with a stone chimney from which smoke was rising. He carried her inside, where blessed warmth enveloped her like an embrace. The cabin was simply furnished but clean, with an iron stove radiating heat, a table and chairs, a rope bed in the corner, and shelves lined with supplies. Harrison laid her on the bed and immediately set about building up the fire. "I am going to make you something to eat," he said, his voice gentle, "but you have to take it slow. If you eat too much too fast after starving, it can hurt you worse. Do you understand?" Eleanor nodded, though she was not sure she did. All she knew was that she was warm for the first time in weeks, and that this stranger was treating her with more kindness than her own family had shown her. She watched through heavy-lidded eyes as Harrison moved around the cabin with the easy competence of a man used to caring for himself. He put a pot of water on the stove to heat, then measured out a small amount of oatmeal into it. While that cooked, he brought her a cup of water and helped her sit up enough to drink it slowly. "Not too fast," he cautioned. "Small sips." The water was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. When the oatmeal was ready, he spooned small amounts into her mouth, waiting patiently between bites to make sure she could keep it down. It was plain, unsweetened oatmeal, but to Eleanor, it was a feast. Her stomach cramped at first, unused to food, but Harrison seemed to know exactly how much to give her. When she had eaten about half a cup, he set the bowl aside. "That's enough for now," he said. "In a few hours you can have more. Right now you need to rest." "Why are you doing this?" Eleanor whispered. "You do not even know me." Harrison pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, his expression serious. "I am the foreman at the Patterson Ranch, about 5 miles north of the Sutton place. I rode over to their ranch this morning to discuss buying one of their bulls. When I got there, Mrs. Sutton was in a state saying something about someone banging around in the attic. Mr. Sutton told me to ignore it, but I could not. I insisted on checking, said maybe they had raccoons or some other pest that needed clearing out. He tried to refuse, but I did not give him much choice." He paused, his jaw tightening. "When I got that door open and saw what they had done, I knew I had to get you out of there." "They will be angry," Eleanor said weakly. "They might cause trouble for you." "Let them try," Harrison said simply. "I have been in Fort Bridger for 3 years now, and people know me. The Suttons have a reputation for being hard people. When folks hear about this, they are not going to take their side." Over the next several days, Harrison cared for Eleanor with patience and dedication. He fed her small amounts every few hours, gradually increasing the portions as her body adjusted to having food again. He made her thin broths, soft bread soaked in milk, scrambled eggs, and gentle stews. He helped her sit up, held cups to her lips when her hands shook too much, and never once made her feel ashamed of her weakness. At night, he slept on the floor near the stove, insisting she take the bed. During the day, he tended to his work at the Patterson Ranch, but he always returned to check on her, bringing fresh supplies and making sure she was warm and fed. Eleanor learned that Harrison was originally from Colorado, the youngest son of a rancher who had come west from Missouri before the war. He had worked his way through various ranches in Colorado and Wyoming, earning a reputation as a skilled cattleman and honest worker. 2 years ago, he had been hired as foreman at the Patterson Ranch, which was one of the largest operations in the Fort Bridger area. He was well liked in town, known for his fair dealing and his willingness to help neighbors in need. He had never married, though at 26 he was certainly of an age when most men had started families. "I never found anyone who made me want to settle down," he said one evening, as he spooned beef stew into a bowl for her. She was sitting up in bed now, able to hold the bowl herself, though her hands still trembled. "My father always said I was too particular, but I figured it was better to wait for the right person than to marry someone just because it was expected." "That is wise," Eleanor said softly. She took a spoonful of the stew, savoring the rich flavor. Her appetite was returning and she no longer felt nauseous after eating. "I thought I had found the right person. Thomas was kind to me. He really was. But I did not know his parents would be so cruel." Harrison settled into his chair, his own bowl in hand. "Tell me about him if you want to." So Eleanor did. She told Harrison about meeting Thomas at the church social, about their courtship and their wedding. She described the few happy months they had shared, living in the main house at the Sutton Ranch, but dreaming of having their own place. She told him about Thomas's death, about the way her in-laws had turned on her immediately afterward, blaming her for their son's accident, even though she had not been anywhere near him when it happened. She told him about being moved to the attic, about the door being locked, about the long days and nights of slowly starving while knowing that help was so close and yet impossibly far away. Harrison listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. When she finished, he set his bowl aside and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Eleanor, I want you to know something. What they did to you was not just cruel, it was criminal. You could have died. They were essentially murdering you slowly." "I know," she whispered. "There were days when I thought death would be a relief." "You are safe now," Harrison said firmly. "You are going to stay here as long as you need to recover. And when you are stronger, we will figure out what comes next. But I promise you the Suttons will not lay another hand on you." By the end of the first week, Eleanor could stand on her own, though her legs were still weak and unsteady. Harrison helped her walk around the cabin, supporting her weight as she took slow, careful steps. He had brought her clothes from town, paid for with his own money since she had been wearing only a thin dress when he rescued her. The new clothes were simple but well made. Warm wool skirts and cotton blouses, thick stockings, and a heavy shawl. "You did not have to do all this," Eleanor said as she examined the clothes, tears in her eyes. "I have no way to repay you." "I do not want repayment," Harrison said. "I want you to get well." By the second week, Eleanor was able to walk without assistance, and she insisted on helping around the cabin. She could not do heavy work yet, but she could wash dishes, fold clothes, and prepare simple meals. Harrison protested at first, but she was stubborn, needing to feel useful after so many weeks of helplessness. They fell into an easy rhythm, working together in the small space. Eleanor found herself looking forward to the evenings when Harrison would return from the Patterson Ranch, his face ruddy from the cold, stamping snow off his boots before coming inside. They talked while they worked, sharing stories about their lives. Harrison told her about growing up in Colorado, about learning to ride before he could walk, about his 2 older brothers who had taken over their father's ranch. He spoke of his mother, who had died when he was 15, and how much he still missed her. Eleanor talked about her own mother, who worked as a seamstress in Fort Bridger, and how she had not seen her in months because the Suttons had forbidden it. She admitted that she was afraid to face her mother now, ashamed of what had happened to her. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," Harrison said firmly. They were sitting at the table after dinner, the oil lamp casting warm light between them. "You did nothing wrong. Your in-laws are the ones who should be ashamed." "My mother warned me," Eleanor said softly. "She said the Suttons were proud people, that they looked down on folks like us, but I thought love would be enough. I thought if Thomas loved me, nothing else would matter." "It should have been enough," Harrison said, "and it would have been if he had lived. You cannot blame yourself for his death or for what his parents did afterward." Eleanor looked at him across the table, at his honest face and kind eyes, and felt something shift in her chest. This man, who had been a stranger 2 weeks ago, had saved her life. He had fed her, clothed her, kept her warm, and asked nothing in return. He treated her with respect and gentleness, never making her feel like a burden. She found herself noticing small things about him, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the laugh lines around his eyes, the strength in his hands. She pushed the thoughts away, reminding herself that she was a widow, that her husband had been dead for barely 3 months, that it was far too soon to be thinking of any man in that way. But the thoughts kept coming back, especially at night when she lay in the bed that still smelled faintly of him, listening to his quiet breathing from his bedroll by the stove. She would think about how safe she felt here, how cared for, how valued. She would remember the gentleness in his touch when he helped her walk, the concern in his voice when he asked how she was feeling, the way he smiled at her when she made a joke. She told herself she was simply grateful that anyone would feel fond of their rescuer. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. The 3rd week after her rescue, Eleanor finally felt strong enough to go into town. She needed to see her mother, to let her know she was alive and safe. Harrison offered to drive her in the wagon, and she accepted gratefully. The snow had let up over the past few days, and the road to Fort Bridger was passable. As they drove through town, Eleanor noticed people stopping to stare. News had spread about what the Suttons had done, and the whole town was talking about it. Harrison had made sure the story got out, stopping by the sheriff's office the day after he rescued Eleanor to make a formal complaint. Sheriff Davis had gone to the Sutton ranch to investigate, and while he had not arrested Margaret or Robert, he had made it clear that they were being watched. The Suttons had retreated to their ranch and stayed there, not showing their faces in town. Public opinion had turned sharply against them, and several families who had done business with them for years were now refusing to trade with them. Eleanor's mother lived in a small house behind the dress shop where she worked. When she opened the door and saw Eleanor standing there, she burst into tears. The 2 women embraced tightly, both of them crying. Eleanor's mother, Catherine Sutton, was a small woman of 45 with prematurely gray hair and work-worn hands. She pulled her daughter inside and fussed over her, exclaiming at how thin she was, how pale, demanding to know if the stories she had heard were true. "They are true, Mama," Eleanor said quietly. "All of it. If Harrison had not come when he did, I would have died in that attic." Catherine turned to Harrison, who had waited respectfully by the door. "You are the man who saved my daughter." "Yes, madam," Harrison said, removing his hat. "Then you have my eternal gratitude," Catherine said fiercely. She crossed the room and took his hands in hers. "Thank you for bringing her back to me. I thought I'd lost her. The Suttons would not let me visit after Thomas died, and when I came to the ranch, they turned me away. I did not know what to do." "Eleanor is staying with me until she is fully recovered," Harrison said. "I want you to know that she is safe and well cared for. You are welcome to visit any time you like." Catherine looked between her daughter and this young man, and something in her expression softened. "I can see that she is well cared for," she said gently. "Thank you, Mr. Porter." They stayed for an hour, drinking tea and catching up. Catherine wanted to know everything that had happened, and Eleanor told her the whole story. Her mother wept again when she heard about the starvation, about the locked attic, about Eleanor's weakness and despair. She also wept with relief that her daughter was alive and recovering. When it was time to leave, Catherine hugged Eleanor tightly and whispered in her ear, "That man cares for you," she said. "I can see it in the way he looks at you." Eleanor felt her face flush. "Mama, it has only been 3 months since Thomas died." "I know, sweetheart," Catherine said. "I am not saying you need to rush into anything, but when you are ready, do not let grief hold you back from happiness. Thomas would not have wanted you to mourn forever." On the drive back to the cabin, Eleanor was quiet, thinking about her mother's words. Harrison did not press her to talk, seeming content to let the silence settle between them. The winter sun was setting, painting the snow pink and gold. Eleanor watched Harrison's profile as he drove, the way the light caught in his hair, the strong line of his jaw. She thought about the past 3 weeks, about all the ways he had cared for her, and she realized that her mother was right. Harrison did care for her, perhaps more than he was willing to admit. And if she was honest with herself, she cared for him too. But was it too soon? Was it wrong to feel this way when her husband had been dead for such a short time? Eleanor had genuinely cared for Thomas, and his death had grieved her. But if she was truthful, their marriage had never had the chance to become truly deep. They had been together for less than a year, much of which had been spent under the critical eyes of his parents. She had been fond of Thomas, but had she been in love with him? Or had she simply been in love with the idea of marriage, of having her own family, of escaping her mother's small house behind the dress shop? The questions troubled her over the next few days. She threw herself into work around the cabin, baking bread and mending Harrison's clothes and scrubbing floors until they shone. Harrison watched her with concern, finally sitting her down one evening and asking what was wrong. "You have been pushing yourself too hard," he said. "Eleanor, you are still recovering. You need to rest." "I feel fine," she insisted. "I am stronger now. I need to do something useful." "You do not have to earn your keep here," Harrison said gently. "I do not expect you to work like a servant." "I know that," Eleanor said, then sighed. "I am sorry. I've just been thinking a lot lately about everything that has happened, about what comes next." "What do you mean?" Eleanor looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "I cannot stay here forever, Harrison. People are already talking. It is not proper for me to be living alone with you, even with everything that happened. I need to find somewhere else to go. Maybe I could rent a room in town, find work somewhere." "Is that what you want?" Harrison asked quietly. "I do not know what I want," Eleanor admitted. "A few months ago I was married. I had a home, a future. Now I am a widow, and everything has changed. I do not know where I belong anymore." Harrison was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Eleanor, I want you to know that you can stay here as long as you need to, as long as you want to. I do not care what people say. But if you want to leave, if you want to make your own way, I will help you do that too. Whatever you need, I am here." Eleanor looked up at him, at the sincerity in his gray eyes, and felt her heart squeeze. "Why are you so good to me?" she whispered. Harrison reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and gentle. "Because you deserve kindness," he said simply. "Because what happened to you was wrong, and I want to help make it right. And because," he paused, as though weighing his words, "because I have come to care about you very much. These past weeks, having you here, getting to know you, it has meant more to me than I can say." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. "I care about you too," she admitted. "More than I probably should. Thomas has only been gone 3 months, and I feel guilty for having these feelings, but I cannot help it. You have been so wonderful to me, Harrison. You saved my life, and you have made me feel valued and safe in a way I have never felt before." "You do not have to feel guilty," Harrison said firmly. "Thomas was your husband, and I respect that. But he is gone, Eleanor. You are still alive, and you deserve to have a life, to be happy. If you need more time before you can even think about the future, I understand. I am not trying to rush you into anything. I just want you to know that I am here, and I care about you, and when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I would be honored to court you properly." Eleanor turned her hand in his so their fingers intertwined. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like that very much. But you are right, I need a little more time. Not because I do not care for you, but because I need to heal, to figure out who I am now that everything has changed." "Take all the time you need," Harrison said. "I'm not going anywhere." As winter gradually gave way to early spring, Eleanor continued to grow stronger. She gained back the weight she had lost, her cheeks filling out, her body regaining its curves. Her hair, which had been dull and brittle from malnutrition, began to shine again. She felt energy returning to her limbs, felt her mind clearing. With Harrison's help, she had faced her trauma and was beginning to heal from it, both physically and emotionally. They settled into a companionable routine that felt almost like marriage, though they were careful to maintain propriety. Harrison still slept by the stove, and Eleanor took the bed. They cooked and cleaned together, talking and laughing as they worked. Harrison taught her to play checkers, and they spent many evenings locked in competitive games, teasing each other over wins and losses. Eleanor mended his clothes and baked him pies, enjoying the way his face lit up when he came home to find something sweet waiting for him. The town had accepted their arrangement largely because everyone knew the circumstances of how they had met. The women of Fort Bridger had rallied around Eleanor, bringing her casseroles and offering her friendship. Several of them had told her bluntly that she was better off without the Suttons, that everyone had always known they were hard people. The pastor's wife, Mrs. Jameson, had visited the cabin one afternoon and spent an hour talking with Eleanor, reassuring her that she had done nothing wrong and that she deserved happiness. "That young man who took you in, he is a good one," Mrs. Jameson had said, glancing at Harrison, who was outside splitting wood. "Not many men would have done what he did. You hold on to him, dear. Good men are rare." In late March, as the snow was finally melting and the first green shoots were pushing up through the earth, Eleanor made her decision. She was helping Harrison prepare dinner, cutting vegetables for a stew, when she suddenly set down her knife and turned to him. "Harrison, I want to tell you something." He looked up from the meat he was browning on the stove. "What is it?" "I have thought about what you said, about courting me properly, and I want that. I am ready for that. These past months with you have been the happiest I have known in a long time. You make me feel safe and valued and cared for. You make me laugh. You listen to me. You treat me as an equal. I think I could be happy with you, truly happy in a way I was not even with Thomas. Is that terrible to say?" "No," Harrison said softly. He set down his spatula and crossed to where she stood. "It is not terrible. It is honest." He took her hands in his. "Eleanor, I have been in love with you for weeks now. I have been trying not to rush you, trying to give you space to heal. But every day I wake up grateful that you are here. Every night I go to sleep thankful that you are safe. You are the finest woman I have ever known, and it would be my greatest honor to court you, to hopefully one day call you my wife." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it." Harrison pulled her into his arms, and Eleanor went willingly, resting her head against his chest and hearing the steady thump of his heart. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other, both of them overwhelmed by the emotions of the moment. Then Harrison tipped her face up gently and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Eleanor's first kiss since Thomas died, and it felt like a beginning, like a door opening onto a new life. They courted properly after that, as properly as they could given that they were still living in the same cabin. Harrison made a point of taking Eleanor into town every Sunday for church, sitting with her in the pews where everyone could see them. He took her for walks along the creek, brought her wildflowers, and held her hand when they sat together in the evenings. He was patient and gentle, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. Eleanor blossomed under his attention, feeling more confident and more herself than she had in years. In May, Harrison asked Catherine for permission to marry Eleanor. Catherine gave her blessing immediately, saying she could not have chosen a better man for her daughter if she had picked him herself. Harrison then made his intentions known to the whole town, announcing at the general store that he planned to marry Eleanor Sutton and that anyone who had a problem with it could take it up with him directly. No one did. The general consensus was that Eleanor deserved happiness after what she had been through, and that Harrison Porter was exactly the kind of man who could give it to her. They were married in June of 1882 in the small church in Fort Bridger with half the town in attendance. Eleanor wore a new dress that her mother had made, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Harrison wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his boots polished. Catherine cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. When the pastor pronounced them man and wife, Harrison kissed Eleanor tenderly, and the whole church erupted in applause. The Suttons did not attend, which was just as well. They had become increasingly isolated in the months since Eleanor's rescue, with more and more of their former friends and business partners cutting ties with them. There were rumors that they were having financial difficulties, that several of their ranch hands had quit in disgust over how they had treated Eleanor. Eleanor felt a pang of sadness for them, not because she forgave them, but because they had lost so much through their own cruelty. They had lost their son, and then they had lost their reputation and their standing in the community. But she could not bring herself to feel too sorry for them. They had tried to kill her through starvation, and she would never forget that. After the wedding, there was a celebration at the town hall with food and music and dancing. Harrison proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, spinning Eleanor around the floor until she was breathless and laughing. She danced with her mother and with several of the town men who wanted to congratulate her. She danced with Mr. Patterson, Harrison's employer, who told her that he was giving Harrison a raise and a bonus to help them start their married life. She danced with Sheriff Davis, who quietly told her that the Suttons were being investigated for several other matters and that justice would be served. As the evening drew to a close, Harrison took Eleanor's hand and led her outside where his wagon was waiting. He had prepared a surprise for her, renting a room at the Fort Bridger Hotel for their wedding night so she could have a proper celebration. Eleanor was touched by the gesture, and she clung to his hand as they drove through the quiet streets to the hotel. Their wedding night was everything Eleanor had hoped it would be. Harrison was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure she was comfortable and happy. He treated her with reverence as though she were something precious and fragile, even as the passion built between them. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the hotel's clean sheets, talking quietly in the darkness. Eleanor told Harrison that she had never felt so loved, so cherished, so complete. Harrison kissed her forehead and promised that he would spend the rest of his life making her happy. They returned to the cabin the next day, but it felt different now. It was not just Harrison's place anymore, it was their home. Eleanor threw herself into making it comfortable, sewing curtains for the windows and braiding rugs for the floor. Harrison built her a larger table and a proper wardrobe for their clothes. They planted a garden together, spending their evenings weeding and watering, watching the vegetables grow. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm, both of them working hard but always finding time for each other. In the fall, Harrison came home with news. Mr. Patterson was retiring and moving back east to live with his daughter. He wanted to sell the ranch, and he was offering Harrison the first chance to buy it. The price was fair, more than fair really, as Mr. Patterson considered Harrison like a son. It would take all their savings and then some, but it would give them their own land, their own herd, their own future. "What do you think, Hinswart?" Harrison asked Eleanor, his eyes shining with excitement and nervousness. "It is a big step taking on that much debt, but I think we could make it work. I know that land like the back of my hand, and the ranch has good water and good grazing. We could build a real life there." Eleanor did not hesitate. "Yes," she said. "Let us do it. Let us build our life together." They bought the Patterson Ranch in October of 1882, signing the papers in the Fort Bridger land office with Catherine and Sheriff Davis as witnesses. The ranch was 2,000 acres of rolling grassland with a solid house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. It came with a small herd of cattle and 3 good horses. Harrison immediately set about making improvements, and Eleanor worked alongside him, both of them putting in long days to make the ranch prosper. The first winter was hard, with heavy snows and bitter cold. But they had each other, and they had plenty of food and warmth. Eleanor often thought about that terrible winter a year earlier when she had been starving in the Sutton attic, and she marveled at how much her life had changed. She had gone from the brink of death to happiness, from despair to hope, from loneliness to love. In the spring of 1883, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Harrison one evening after dinner, watching nervously for his reaction. His face lit up with such pure joy that she started crying. He swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing and whooping with excitement. They spent the evening making plans, talking about names and cribs and all the changes a baby would bring. "Boy or girl, it does not matter to me," Harrison said, his hand resting gently on Eleanor's still flat stomach. As long as you both are healthy, I will be the happiest man alive. Eleanor gave birth in December of 1883 to a healthy baby boy they named Henry Thomas Porter. The Thomas was for Eleanor's first husband, a way of honoring his memory while moving forward with her new life. Harrison cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with emotion. Catherine came to stay with them for 2 weeks, helping Eleanor adjust to motherhood and fussing over her grandson. Henry was a good baby, with Harrison's gray eyes and Eleanor's dark hair. He was curious and alert, always watching everything around him with solemn attention. Harrison was a devoted father, rocking Henry to sleep at night and changing his diapers without complaint. He built a beautiful cradle from oak wood and carved their son's name into the headboard. Eleanor would often catch him just standing over the cradle, watching Henry sleep, a look of wonder on his face. The ranch prospered over the next few years. Harrison proved to be a skilled rancher, and their herd grew steadily. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men from town who were respectful and hardworking. Eleanor managed the household in the garden, canned vegetables for the winter, made soap and candles, and raised their son. It was hard work, but it was satisfying work, and they were building something together. In 1885, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Catherine Porter after her mother. Emma was a delicate baby with blonde hair and blue eyes, nothing like either of her parents. She was also more difficult than Henry had been, fussy and prone to colic. Eleanor spent many nights walking the floor with her, trying to soothe her crying. Harrison would take over when he could, letting Eleanor get some much-needed sleep. Those were exhausting months, but they got through them together. The Suttons never bothered them. Robert died in 1884, thrown from his horse just as his son had been. Margaret sold the ranch soon after and moved away, reportedly to live with a cousin in Kansas. Eleanor felt a certain closure when she heard that the ranch had been sold. That chapter of her life finally completely closed. Henry grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly. Emma developed into a sweet, gentle girl who loved helping her mother in the garden and playing with the kittens that lived in the barn. The cabin they had started in had been expanded into a proper house, with separate bedrooms for the children and a big kitchen where the family gathered for meals. In 1888, Eleanor gave birth to twin boys Matthew and Marcus. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth even more so, but Eleanor came through it stronger than ever. Harrison was beside himself with joy at having 4 healthy children, though he was also slightly terrified at the prospect of raising twin boys. The twins were identical, with mischievous grins and boundless energy. They kept Eleanor running from morning to night, getting into everything and keeping their older siblings on their toes. The Porter Ranch became known throughout the Fort Bridger area as one of the most successful and well-run operations. Harrison's reputation for honesty and hard work spread, and he was often asked for advice by other ranchers. Eleanor became involved in the church and in organizing community events, becoming a respected figure in her own right. People who remembered the starving young widow Harrison had rescued from the Sutton attic marveled at her transformation into a confident, capable ranch wife and mother. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1892, Harrison surprised Eleanor with a trip to Denver. Catherine came to watch the children, and Harrison and Eleanor took the train west, spending a week in the city. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate in restaurants, went to the theater, and simply enjoyed being together without the demands of the ranch and children. It was magical, a second honeymoon that reminded them both of how far they had come and how much they loved each other. "Do you remember the first time I fed you?" Harrison asked one evening as they sat in the hotel restaurant, candlelight flickering between them. "You were so weak you could barely hold the spoon." "I remember," Eleanor said softly. "I thought I was going to die. And then you appeared like some kind of angel sent to save me." "I am no angel," Harrison said with a laugh. "I am just a man who could not stand by and let something terrible happen." "You are my hero," Eleanor said seriously. "You saved my life, Harrison, not just by feeding me and taking care of me, but by showing me what real love looks like. You have given me everything I could have ever wanted: a home, a family, a partner who treats me as an equal. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I did not think that was possible." Harrison reached across the table and took her hand. "And I love you more than words can express. You have made me happier than I ever dreamed I could be. These 10 years with you have been the best of my life." They returned to the ranch refreshed and more in love than ever. Their children were growing: Henry, now 9 years old and already helping with serious ranch work; Emma, a sweet 7-year-old who loved books and horses equally; and the twins, energetic 5-year-olds who were constantly testing boundaries. The house was always full of noise and laughter, and Eleanor often paused in her work to simply appreciate the life she had built. In 1894, Eleanor's mother, Catherine, became ill. She had never been a strong woman, worn down by years of hard work and hardship, and at 64 her body was simply giving out. Eleanor brought her to the ranch to care for her, setting her up in a comfortable room where she could look out the window at the mountains. Catherine lived for 6 more months, surrounded by her daughter and grandchildren, peaceful and content. She died quietly in her sleep one October night, and they buried her in the Fort Bridger Cemetery beside Eleanor's father. Eleanor grieved her mother's death deeply, but she was grateful that Catherine had lived to see her so happy and settled. Catherine had died knowing that her daughter was loved and cared for, that she had recovered from the trauma of the Sutton family and built a beautiful life. That was a comfort in the midst of sorrow. The years continued to pass peacefully. Henry grew into a fine young man, as tall as his father and just as skilled with horses and cattle. He took on more responsibility at the ranch, and Harrison began to talk about eventually turning the operation over to him. Emma became a talented seamstress like her grandmother, making beautiful clothes for herself and her brothers. The twins, while still mischievous, developed into hard workers who took pride in the ranch. In 1898, when Henry was 15, he asked his father about Eleanor's past. He had heard whispers in town about what had happened with the Suttons, and he wanted to know the truth. Harrison and Eleanor sat down with all 4 children and told them the story, not holding back the difficult parts. They explained about Thomas's death, about the starvation, about Harrison's rescue. The children were horrified and angry, Emma crying at the thought of what her mother had endured. "Why did they hate you so much?" Emma asked, clinging to Eleanor's hand. "Because they thought I was not good enough for their son," Eleanor said gently. "Because they were cruel people who cared more about pride than kindness. But the important thing is that I survived, and I found your father, and we built this life together. Bad things happened, but good things came from it." "Your mother is the strongest person I know," Harrison added, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. "She survived something that would have broken most people, and she did not let it make her bitter or angry. She chose love and hope instead. That is a lesson for all of you." The children seemed to understand, and they all hugged Eleanor tightly, promising to always take care of her. It was a turning point, a moment when the family became even closer, bound together by shared knowledge of the past and appreciation for the present. In 1900, Henry met a girl named Sarah Williams at a church social. She was the daughter of a shopkeeper in Fort Bridger, a pretty girl with red hair and a quick smile. Henry was smitten immediately, and he began courting her with all the seriousness of a young man in love. Harrison and Eleanor approved, seeing in Sarah the same qualities of kindness and strength that had drawn them to each other. Henry married Sarah in the spring of 1901, when he was 18 and she was 17, in the same church where Harrison and Eleanor had married 19 years earlier. The young couple built a small house on the Porter Ranch, and Henry continued to work alongside his father. Eleanor welcomed Sarah into the family warmly, teaching her the skills she would need as a ranch wife. Sarah proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker, and she fit seamlessly into the Porter family. A year later, she gave birth to a son, making Harrison and Eleanor grandparents for the first time. Eleanor held her grandson, little James Porter, and thought about how miraculous life was. 20 years ago, she had been dying in an attic, convinced that her life was over. Now she was a grandmother surrounded by love and family, living on a prosperous ranch with a husband who adored her. It seemed almost impossible that so much good could come from so much pain. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Emma met a young rancher named Daniel Cooper at a barn raising, and they courted for 2 years before marrying in 1903. Daniel brought his own land to the marriage, and he and Emma settled on a ranch adjacent to the Porter place. The twins, Matthew and Marcus, showed no signs of settling down yet, enjoying their freedom and the work of the ranch. They talked about eventually buying their own spread together, working as partners the way they had done everything since birth. Harrison turned 45 in 1905, and Eleanor threw him a surprise party inviting half the county. It was a beautiful summer evening, with long tables set up in the yard, music and dancing and laughter filling the air. Their children and grandchildren were there, along with friends they had made over the years. Harrison stood with his arm around Eleanor, looking out at the crowd, and shook his head in wonder. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked. "We are both lucky," Eleanor said, leaning into his embrace. "We found each other when we both needed saving." "I did not need saving," Harrison protested. "Yes, you did," Eleanor said firmly. "You told me once that you were waiting for the right person, that you had never found anyone who made you want to settle down. I think you were lonely, Harrison. I think you were saving yourself for me just as much as you saved me. We rescued each other." Harrison was quiet for a moment, then kissed the top of her head. "You might be right," he admitted. "I think we were meant to find each other. Everything that happened, as terrible as it was, led us to this moment, and I would not change a thing if it meant not having you." As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Harrison and Eleanor stood together surrounded by their family and friends. They had weathered hardship and loss, had built something beautiful from ashes and despair. Their love had grown and deepened over the years, becoming the foundation on which their entire life was built. In 1910, 28 years after they first met, Eleanor and Harrison celebrated their own anniversary quietly at home. The children were grown now, living their own lives, and the house was peaceful in a way it had not been in years. They sat on the porch in the evening, watching the sun set just as they had done so many times before. "Do you ever think about that winter?" Eleanor asked softly. "When you found me in the attic?" "Sometimes," Harrison admitted. "I think about how close I came to not going to the Sutton Ranch that day. If I had not needed to discuss buying that bull, if I had not insisted on checking the attic, if I had been even a day later, I might have lost you before I even met you." "But you did come," Eleanor said, taking his hand. "You saved me, Harrison, and then you loved me back to life. Every day I spent with you was a day I got stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. You taught me what love should be, what partnership should be. You gave me back my life and then made it better than I ever dreamed it could be." "You did the same for me," Harrison said. "You gave me purpose, Eleanor. You gave me a family and a home, and a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive. I was just existing before I met you. After you, I started truly living." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, hearts full. The years had been kind to them, etching laugh lines around their eyes and silver in their hair, but leaving their love undiminished. They had built a legacy together, a family, and a ranch that would endure long after they were gone. They had proved that love could triumph over cruelty, that hope could survive even the darkest circumstances, that two people who found each other at the right moment could build something extraordinary together. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eleanor leaned her head on Harrison's shoulder and thought about the long journey that had brought them here. From starvation to abundance, from despair to joy, from loneliness to love. It had been quite a journey full of challenges and triumphs, sorrows and celebrations, but through it all, they had had each other, and that had made all the difference. The years continued to unfold gently for Harrison and Eleanor Porter. In 1912, the twins finally decided to buy their own ranch, pooling their resources to purchase a spread about 15 miles from the Porter place. Eleanor helped them set up their household, teaching them the domestic skills they would need as bachelors running their own operation. Harrison gave them cattle from the Porter herd as a start, watching with pride as his sons rode off to begin their own adventure. Emma and Daniel had 3 children by then, 2 boys and a girl, and they brought them to visit the Porter Ranch every Sunday after church. Henry and Sarah had added 2 more children to their family, giving Harrison and Eleanor a total of 6 grandchildren with another on the way. The house that had once been full of their own children's noise was now often filled with the sound of grandchildren playing, and Eleanor loved every minute of it. In the summer of 1913, Fort Bridger held a celebration for its 50th anniversary. The town had grown significantly since Eleanor and Harrison had first come there, with more shops, a new school, and even a small library. As 2 of the more prominent citizens, Harrison and Eleanor were asked to speak at the celebration about their experiences building the community. Eleanor was nervous about public speaking, but Harrison encouraged her, telling her that her story was one of hope and resilience that others needed to hear. Standing on the platform in the town square with Harrison beside her for support, Eleanor told the assembled crowd about coming to Fort Bridger as a young bride, about the tragedy of losing Thomas, about the cruelty of the Suttons and her subsequent rescue by Harrison. She spoke about the kindness of the community in accepting her and Harrison, about building the ranch together, about raising their family. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, and by the end, many in the crowd were wiping away tears. "This town gave me a second chance at life," Eleanor concluded. "The people here showed me compassion when I needed it most. Harrison and I have tried to pay that forward by being good neighbors, by helping others when we can, by building something lasting that our children and grandchildren can be proud of. Fort Bridger is more than just a place to us. It is home, and it always will be." The crowd erupted in applause, and several people came up afterward to thank Eleanor for sharing her story. The mayor shook both their hands and said they were exactly the kind of citizens that made Fort Bridger special. It was a proud moment for both of them, recognition that they had not just survived but thrived, that they had contributed something meaningful to their community. That fall, tragedy struck when a barn fire broke out at the twins' ranch. Matthew was badly burned trying to save the horses, and for weeks his life hung in the balance. Eleanor moved to the twins' ranch to nurse him, sleeping in a chair beside his bed and changing his bandages with gentle hands. Harrison managed both ranches during that time, working from dawn to dusk to keep everything running. Marcus was beside himself with worry, and Harrison had to be firm with him, reminding him that his brother needed him to be strong. Matthew eventually recovered, though he bore scars from the burns for the rest of his life. The experience brought the whole family even closer together, everyone pitching in to help rebuild the barn and replace the lost livestock. It was a reminder that life on the frontier was still hard and dangerous, that tragedy could strike without warning. But it was also a reminder of the strength of family, of the power of people coming together in times of crisis. As 1915 dawned, Harrison and Eleanor found themselves in their early 60s, still active and healthy but feeling the weight of the years. Henry had taken over most of the day-to-day management of the ranch, and Harrison was able to step back somewhat, spending more time with Eleanor and their grandchildren. They took long walks together, talking about their lives and their memories. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains they loved. They read books together, attended church socials, and simply enjoyed each other's company. "Do you have any regrets?" Eleanor asked one evening as they sat together, a quilt wrapped around both of them against the autumn chill. Harrison thought about it carefully. "No," he said finally. "I do not think I do. Oh, there are things I might have done differently, decisions I second-guess sometimes, but the big things, the important things, I got right. I found you. I married you. We built this life together. How could I regret any of that?" "I feel the same way," Eleanor said softly. "Even the terrible things, the starvation and the cruelty, I cannot quite regret them because they led me to you. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Harrison said, pulling her closer. "We were meant to be together, Eleanor. I've always believed that. The universe, or God, or fate, or whatever you want to call it, brought us together. and I am grateful every single day. In the spring of 1917, America entered the Great War in Europe. The twins, despite being in their mid-30s, volunteered to serve. It was agonizing for Eleanor and Harrison to watch their sons go off to war, not knowing if they would ever see them again. The whole family gathered to see them off at the train station in Fort Bridger, everyone trying to be brave and supportive even as tears streamed down their faces. The war years were difficult, with every letter from France treasured and every day without news a torture. Eleanor threw herself into war work, knitting socks and scarves for soldiers, organizing supply drives, and helping other women whose sons and husbands were fighting. Harrison worked the ranch harder than ever, knowing that food production was vital to the war effort. They leaned on each other during those dark days, taking comfort in their love and their faith. The twins both survived the war, returning home in 1919 scarred by what they had seen but grateful to be alive. They settled back into ranch life, though they were quieter now, more serious. Eleanor mothered them as she had when they were boys, cooking their favorite foods and sitting with them when the nightmares came. Harrison gave them space to heal, to process their experiences, and gradually they began to recover. The 1920s brought prosperity and peace to the Porter family. The ranch was thriving, with the younger generation managing it capably. Harrison and Eleanor became the beloved patriarch and matriarch of a growing family, with grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren to spoil. They were fixtures in Fort Bridger, respected and admired by everyone who knew them. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1922, the family threw them a massive celebration. All their children and grandchildren were there, along with friends from throughout the county. There was a dance, with Harrison leading Eleanor around the floor just as he had on their wedding day 40 years earlier. His hair was silver now, and her face was lined with the marks of time, but their love was as strong as ever. 40 years, Eleanor marveled as they danced. How did it go so fast? I do not know, Harrison said, but I would gladly do it all again every single day as long as I could spend them with you. You old romantic, Eleanor teased, but her eyes were wet with happy tears. Only for you, Harrison said, kissing her softly. Only ever for you. As the decade progressed, they began to slow down. Harrison had trouble with his knees, the result of decades of hard physical labor. Eleanor's hands became arthritic, making sewing difficult, but they adapted, finding new ways to contribute to the family and the ranch. Harrison advised the younger generation on business matters, his decades of experience invaluable. Eleanor taught her granddaughters to cook and sew, passing down skills and recipes that had been passed down to her. In the winter of 1927, Harrison fell ill with pneumonia. At 67, he was not as resilient as he had once been, and for a time it seemed he might not recover. Eleanor nursed him with the same dedication he had once shown her, sitting beside his bed day and night, spooning broth into his mouth, bathing his fevered forehead with cool cloths. She prayed as she had not prayed in years, begging God not to take him from her, not yet, not when they still had so much life left to live together. Harrison pulled through, though it took months for him to fully recover. The experience sobered them both, a reminder that their time together was not infinite, that every day was precious. They made a point after that to tell each other, I love you every morning and every night, to never part angry, to appreciate the small moments of joy that made up their life together. Eleanor turned 70 in 1932, and the family gathered to celebrate. She looked around at her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was her legacy, this family that had grown from the love between her and Harrison. These people would carry on after she was gone, passing down stories and values and memories. She had survived starvation and cruelty and loss, and she had created all of this. It was a good life, a beautiful life, and she was proud of it. Harrison held her hand through the celebration, his grip still strong despite his age. They had been together for 50 years now, married for 45 of them. They had weathered every storm together, had celebrated every joy together, had built an entire world together, and they were not done yet. They still had mornings to watch the sunrise, evenings to watch the sunset, quiet moments to simply be together. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered to him as the party wound down. "For what?" Harrison asked. "For saving me," she said. "For loving me. For giving me this life. For being exactly who you are." "You saved me too," Harrison reminded her. "We saved each other, remember?" "I remember," Eleanor said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I remember everything." As the years continued to pass, Harrison and Eleanor Porter remained fixtures in Fort Bridger, living out their days in the house they had built together on the ranch they had carved from the wilderness. They had survived and thrived, had loved and been loved, had created a legacy that would endure for generations. The starving woman and the cowboy who saved her had become so much more than that. They had become partners, lovers, friends, parents, grandparents. They had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of compassion and the resilience of the human heart. And when they sat together on their porch in the evenings watching the sunset over the mountains, they did not talk about the past or worry about the future. They simply held hands and appreciated the present moment, grateful for every day they had been given together. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the hardships they had overcome or the successes they had achieved, but the love they had shared and the life they had built together, one day at a time, one moment at a time, one heartbeat at a time. Their love story, born from tragedy and nurtured through dedication, had created ripples that would echo through the generations, a reminder that even in the darkest winters, spring always comes and love always finds a way.